So I'm very excited to have the combination of these three fantastic panelists for our conversation on leadership today in the future of work. So it's okay with everyone. I'd like to get started. McKinsey put out a great paper about a year ago on the skills that the future of workplaces are going to need going forward. And they talked about it in terms of the automation adoption will not only accelerate the skill shift for individual workers, but also is going to have profound impact on our workplaces and the way that we're organized. Firms are going to really need to rethink and retool their corporate structure and their approaches to work, which has so much to do with leadership. And that means redesign processes, a new focus on the talent they have and the talent they need. So with this in mind, and John, I'm going to start with you. What will leaders have to do to ready themselves for these changes?
Well, I think it really comes down to, in any time period, whether it be 2019 moving into 2020 or 10 years ago, if you look at business problems, you can almost always look to the psychology of the leaders at the top. And so while there's a lot of change going on, there's so many of the, at the same time, tried and true principles that remain the same today that leaders just have to adjust to. They just have to do a better job of adapting to the speed of change, what people want today, how flat their organization might be versus in the past that might have been very hierarchical. And so there's all kinds of factors that play into that change. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's 2010 or 2020. The organizations will only go to the height that their leaders are willing to take them.
Love hearing about that in terms of how facile leaders will need to be, which is, again, in any instance, but certainly more now. Rebecca, I know you've shared with me at Enigma this whole squad concept. And, what I'm curious about is how your leaders are adapting to what is a very agile workplace that you've implemented at Enigma.
Yep, so thanks for the question. For those of you who might not be familiar with a squad structure, at Enigma, we've deliberately removed the hierarchy and we've created a flat organization. And we believe this is how work's going to get done more nimbly, more quickly. Our work gets done through squads. Squads are staffed every quarter. Every quarter, every squad has an outcome that they're driving towards. Squads are aligned towards business outcomes, and they're made up of cross-functional team members. So depending on what outcome is required, we would staff it with a data scientist, an engineer, a designer, someone in marketing. And at the end of the 90 days, squads are evaluated against their outcomes, and we have compensation programs aligned to results, where our framework is outsized rewards for outsized impact. Every squad has a tech lead that kind of acts as a CTO. Every squad has a product lead that acts as the CEO, and maybe even a business development person. And so we say that the roles people hold are only for the 90 days, and folks really need to be much more nimble and agile to take on new roles depending on what outcomes the business has for the 90 days coming forward. So we really need leaders who are comfortable in ambiguity, who are able to influence without authority, high collaboration that are in service of the bigger system, and an internal drive that comes from within versus needing the external. So those are the traits we look for when we do talent assessment. Those are the traits that we reward through our rewards and recognition. And those are the traits that we absolutely require our leaders to model for those in the organization.
Yeah, that's excellent to hear in terms of where the leadership comes into play in that kind of a dynamic workplace. What I didn't share with our audience, and I would love to do this, and John, you had flagged me yesterday about this, is please in the comments, tell us where you're from, where you're listening from, and also if you have questions or thoughts along the way of our conversation, we'd love to see those in the comments. I'm monitoring that as the panel is having this discussion, so please, we'd love to hear from you. What I want to continue this discussion about, leaders in this more dynamic workplace, right? The speed of the adaption of the change and so forth. And, what I'm learning from this McKinsey study is what a mind shift companies are going to have to go through, right, to really shift from this very hierarchical world that many of us have lived in and have come to know, to really providing also continuous learning opportunities for not only our leaders, and how do leaders enable that? How do they accelerate those learning environments that are necessary for everyone to get used to this changing structure and world? And so, Todd, I'm going to ask you on this one. Where do you see, especially with your deep expertise around, being that visionary, seeing leadership through visionary work and storytelling, how is that, or if any place that has now in these new agile workplaces?
Yeah. Well, one of the key things I was thinking of as we were talking is that, there's two ways to define leadership. In addition to running my company, I also am an adjunct professor of leadership at NYU, where I teach in the HR Master's program, and I also teach leadership at Columbia as well. I went to an NYU symposium on leadership a few years ago where professors on leadership from all across the school met. There was a big discussion and debate about big L leadership versus small L leadership, right? Big L leadership is about having the leadership title. You're the VP, you're the head of this, you're the head of that. And the small L camp, which I fell into, is that everyone's a leader in one way or at one time or another, or needs to be. And I was thinking about the classic Harvard study where they found that most people get their first management leadership role at around age late 20s, early 30s, but they don't, quote, earn the right to go through leadership development until they're in their 40s, right? So what's happening for those 10 years? People are leading without any development, without any coaching. So one of my key things is pushing leadership development down to the lowest levels of an organization, and really generating and developing the people from the bottom and the people at the top, so everyone's leading in different ways. So that's one of my key things, and leading with the vision. Speaking of vision, the vision of the leadership team in mind as you do that.
Right. And John, this is the hard.
Todd, I was going to say, Todd, we define leadership as someone whose actions inspire, empower, and serve in order to elevate others over an extended period of time. And in all my work of helping leaders of all different ages at this point in all different industries, I'm more convinced than ever that all of us can lead right from where we are.
Yeah.
And I think it becomes so instrumental in an organization like Rebecca's talking about. If we're going to get flatter, and if we're going to have less hierarchy and more decisions made by more people, which is super important today, we need every single person thinking about their actions and elevating other people, not for the short term, but for the long term. And that is not for the select few. Right. A mentor of mine always says to me, if not you, then who? Right. And I just love that mindset, because all of a sudden it's like, I'm not going to wait for somebody else to take the reins or to do this or to help this customer or to innovate. I can go help this team accomplish these things. Yeah. So that's the way I like for everybody to at least think about, if not you, then who today, across your organizations.
One of my clients had signs all over that says, we are they. Because so many people say, well, they won't let us do this. And they always say that. It's like, if you shift the mindset, reframe it to we are they, then what are you going to do about it, right?
That's right.
The one thing we've done at Enigma is we've created spaces for managers to support other managers so they feel like they're in a tribe together. Whenever I coach someone through a difficult situation, I'm always encouraging them to go back to their managers group and share the story. What happened? What did you learn? What was your failure? What would you teach others now that you've gone through it? So that they're learning from each other rather than being siloed on their team where they're only interacting, say, with an HR partner or with their manager. They can see each other as peers and learn from each other, because there's so much in management that you see patterns, but you may experience it for the first time. What can you teach your peers? And so we're always trying to facilitate that openness and sharing, and the vulnerability too.
So question for everyone that I had, just so the audience knows, I had provided questions to our panel ahead of time just so that we could be a little prepared to have a robust discussion. But something just really came to mind for me is, we're talking about all of this AI and automation, and it's coming at us sort of at the speed of light. I watched a 60 Minutes clip on Sunday night that I was mentioning to Todd, where I think it's Dr. Lee is really the foremost authority on AI in China and quite frankly, probably across the world. But he talked about 40% of the workforce in the next decade will be changed in terms of their roles will not exist as they currently exist. And there will be new roles for them to be in, because automation doesn't mean loss of roles necessary. It just means repurposed roles. So when you think about that, John, when you're working with your clients and you're working with having these managers become leaders and everyone taking that responsibility, how does a company get ready for that? How do they get their people ready for these new roles that don't even exist yet?
Well, I think it starts with organizations are going to look more like universities. I mean, they're going to have their own university or academy, and they're going to be always looking at what are the next skills that need to develop in our people. Now, here's the key. So many people say, well, it's my company's job to have me in development. And I call absolute BS, okay? Nobody can take control of your development. I mean, our organizations and our HR departments and our leaders like Rebecca can do all they can to provide the opportunities. But at the end of the day, I get to choose, Rebecca gets to choose, our audience gets to choose. They get to choose if they join this LinkedIn Live and say, can I go improve my skills a little bit? So I think the future is going to look more like organizations almost running their own university, particularly as colleges change. But in the future, it always will come down to the choices that each of us make in our development journey. And so I think it's going to look a lot different, but at the end of the day, it's going to remain the same.
I don't know if you all saw this, but Amazon just announced 100,000 of their workers being, tagged to be into retraining programs over the next coming years, right? Because their jobs are changing because of automation. That talk about a university of 100,000 people, right, John? I mean, there you have it, right? That's what you just described, is how do companies take on that retraining and make that available if that's individuals' choices in order to upskill, reskill, new skill, whatever that might be, whatever that equation might be.
I'll share a really quick story, real brief, I promise. I'm seeing a big trend in more elective learning in organizations. So in the past, organizations would put on these big training programs where every salesperson or every sales manager, every XYZ has to come. It's just a part of being employed here. And I've seen a tremendous trend in putting on programs that are elective in nature. So the learners that decide to go in these organizations, they're there to grow and get better and improve, and they don't feel like it's something they have to do. They're choosing to be there. So I think that will also continue as organizations get smarter with the investments they make in people and say, we know it's our responsibility to provide opportunity, but we want the people there that want to be there.
And with that, right, this leads us in, and I know one of the panels earlier today talked about, engagement and experience in the human workplace, so I certainly don't want to be repetitive to our colleagues who spoke before us, but this starts to really get at that engagement, right? That real engagement in organizations, and how in this new described future that we have some view of, but we don't know it all, that's for sure. How will that have to be looked at differently? Because today, as we all know, and probably our listeners do, we get very anchored in, as you talked about it, John, the trifecta, right? The mission, vision, values, the purpose of the organization to keep me committed, knowing why I'm here and why I want to be engaged. So Rebecca, I'm curious, for Enigma, where does that sit in your company, and how do your leaders continue to level up that engagement and retention that's necessary for the future?
Yeah. So I'm in the technology space, and so 70 to 80% of our workforce are engineers, data scientists, product managers. So I need to kind of anchor in that. And we're also in New York City, where there are a lot of job opportunities if those are your skills. So I need to preface what I'm about to say, knowing that that's the demographics of our workforce. I think the idea that people stay in a job for 10, 20, 30 years is just an antiquated notion. At Enigma, I never take for granted that employees are making the choice to return to work every single day. And so We really have to pay attention to the reasons that they choose to walk through those doors and come back. So we know we need to provide opportunities for them to continue to grow and learn personally, but also to continue to contribute to the world in a meaningful way. We know that we're a mission-driven organization, and people joined our organizations to contribute to something and build something bigger than themselves. So this requires us getting to know every single individual as humans and empowering our managers with the right skills to build relationships on an individual level. And so at Enigma, I run this process that I generically call a line by line. So every 6 months we do performance review cycles, and then 90 days later, so on the off cycle, I run a process with every leadership team of every department where we look through and talk about every employee on a line by line basis. So we talk about what's their potential for a new job. What are their motivational drivers? What's keeping them engaged? Are we seeing disengagement issues or performance issue? Who's owning this? Who's owning the feedback? And so every leader in the room owns someone in the talent, and collectively we know our population, we know our highest performers, we know what their motivation is, and we can be more deliberate to pull on those levers and keep those folks engaged. So that means 4 times a year, we are reviewing our talent line by line and owning them. Twice in performance review calibration, and then twice in our line by line.
So what my takeaway is for that, and Todd, I'd be interested to hear what you want to add to this, is that's a very hands-on human approach. Yeah. Because there definitely is this fear, I think, that certainly has run across my mind too, which is all of this automation and AI, and Rebecca's sitting in a technology company. We're not going to be needed. The world gets taken over, right, by robots. And it's not the case. That's a very human, hands-on process that no automation will be able to take the place of. So Todd, anything that you have to add there?
Well, a few things. One is I was thinking, as you were talking about, I always talk about Dan Pink's book, Drive, What Motivates People, and the 3 things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? So you need to give people the autonomy, the freedom, and the flexibility to do their job the way that's best for them. Mastery, people need to be continuously learning and growing. And purpose, people need to feel that what they're doing really matters. So as an organization, if you can get people to use that as you factor into designing people's roles and responsibilities, that will go a long way. And I was also thinking about the saying in the training business, what if we train them and they leave, or what if we don't train them and they stay, right? So it's like we want people, the best companies have the philosophy of we want to make people as marketable and as skilled as possible, but then create a culture and a climate that engages them and gets them to want to stay, right?
Yeah, I think that's great. And John,
like I said, they could walk out any day, or they could not come in that day, especially in this age of ghosting. You just say, oh, where's so-and-so? Oh, they just started a new company yesterday. And it's like, okay, I did not know that.
John, did you have something that you wanted to add to that? I couldn't get.
I would just, the big thing here that I think's really changed a lot in the human element is the human resource professional. I mean, we're kind of overlooking that here in the fact that in the past, Rebecca's job was simply about hiring the best talent she could find and firing the ones that don't work. And today it's in every organization, it's not different. But in the best organizations, there's a chief people officer, there's a chief human officer, there's someone on the lookout and out to help grow and develop the human beings that are there. And so I think it will only continue to change if we get people that say, this is the role of HR moving forward, and not slipping back to the old ways to say, just call me in when there's a problem.
Yeah, I think that's quite valid. It's interesting. I just came away from a meeting with a PE firm, and one of my dear colleagues and friends, someone actually that Rebecca knows, is now their partner for talent for the portfolio of PE companies in order to accelerate the growth of those organizations and so forth. So HR is square in the middle of the need on the human piece of the equation, without a doubt. I want to jump to the workforce composition, if that's okay with everyone. And also, for those of you listening, I understand we're having some real connectivity issues on LinkedIn Live. This will be recorded and made available after our session completes at around 1:30 or so. So please be patient with us. Stick with us if you can. It's going to be well worth it. I know it's a little spotty. And if you have a chance, if you want to jump in and let me know where you're from or let us know and things that you want to comment or question, I'm certainly trying to follow the feed. And although my connection is spotty with LinkedIn Live too. And Rebecca, you got a kudos on those squads. I think people really are finding that very compelling and interesting. And I have a sense people are going to reach out to you afterwards to find out more. But the workforce composition, we've all known this for a while, is changing, right? We hear this gig economy and freelancers and the sharing economy and so forth. But that is going to continue. And as Rebecca said, and I love that statement, which is people are making a choice every day to whether or not to return to their workplace based on what's happening for them and how engaged they are. But with the whole concept of the gig economy, freelancers, virtual, global, and so forth, how do leaders really adapt that right mindset for the actions that they're going to need to take to have this complex workplace that's serviced by very different people from very different places, right? It's our permanent full-time, it's our consultants, it's the gig, it's the freelancer. How do leaders really shift to be okay with that and become the early adopter, not the late adopter? John, I'm going to start with you on that one, if that's okay.
I actually love this question for two reasons. One is, if you think of it like a sports team, okay? A football team all plays together. A soccer team, they all play on the same field, passing to each other, a lot of teamwork. If you think of Rebecca's squad comment, they're working together in 90 days and then moving forward with people kind of out on their own, rogue agents, but they add to they're more like a golf team, okay? All the golf team members, their scores add up to a total score, but they're each playing their own game. And so I would say moving forward, this is only going to continue. And so what do leaders have to do? They have to rely on one very important thing that has always remained tried and true in leadership, and that is the relationship with human beings. I mean, it sounds so simple, but you don't lead everybody at once, you lead them one at a time. And so I think leaders that are a part of this remote workforce and gig economy, leading 10 drivers or 10 XYZ, they have to really focus on building those relationships one at a time as much as possible. And I would highly recommend at least trying to get that team together that might not rely on each other together at least once or twice a year to share best practices, exactly what Rebecca and her team are doing with their managers. Becomes really important.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, right? Is what you just said there, John, in terms of, what's the action that needs to be taken, which is to share those best practices, what's working, what's not working. And Rebecca, I think we all love your concept of the line by line, right? It almost is a line by line as it relates to this variety of your workforce, right? And where they're coming from, because they're going to be necessary. If you think about, if we take it for fact that 40% of the whole of the workforce in the next decade will shift entirely, which means that there's going to be different requirements for the type of work. We're not all going to be able to be retrained in our place of employment. And so our companies are going to have to get specialists in from different ways in order to produce whatever it is that that company produces. And so getting comfortable with this variety of teams, and I think Enigma is sort of setting the stage for the 90-day squad. That's almost getting used to people coming in and out very frequently, Rebecca. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and the one thing I would love to add to, I do think it comes to the humans, but being so specific and clear about the expectations is what makes it successful. So if you are having people come in and out of your organization for short periods of time, management or leaders, someone has to be very clear about what you're expecting of those individuals. What does success look like? What outcomes? We use this word outcomes because it's so specific that something can be delivered. And I know this is like the old school way of saying it, but it has to be, measurable. Like when we talk about SMART goals, it's even more important to be so clear that you are setting an objective that can be measured and people know what to do. When you don't have this time or luxury to onboard someone for 90 days and integrate them into the organization and culture and skill them up. If someone's coming in really quickly, they need to know what they need to deliver. So communication, clarity, consistency on outcomes is really important for this type of workforce.
And Todd, I know that you're sort of jumping at the bit here to add water to, but I want to tie it to this next question, which I referenced earlier, and I'm borrowing this phrase from John the other day, which, he talked about that trifecta of the mission, vision, values.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure we cover that. So, add what you would like to this discussion, but then I'd like you to jump into, where does all of this mission, vision, values have a place in the go forward plan, in the go forward workplace, this very agile workplace that has this mix of people doing the work?
Yeah. Again, there's so much going on. My head is spinning with a million different things. The big thing that jumped out at me was leaders need to be more flexible than ever. When I worked at companies, like, for example, years ago, earlier in my career, I worked at Disney and I was temping in the PR department, and I had a great idea, and I kind of raised my hand. They're like, "Oh, you're just the temp," as opposed to, because companies was like, "Here's our full-time people, here's our consultants, here's our temp pool," and it's like, you got to earn the right to contribute an idea or to whatever. As a leader, and kind of Rebecca's describing it, you have to be much more fluid and flexible. People will be coming in and out, staying for short-term, long-term, working from home, working virtually, working in other countries. As a leader, how do you integrate everyone and make everyone feel like a part of the team, appreciated, recognized? I always use the 3 V's: visibility, voice, and value. How are you seen? How are you heard? And how are you contributing? Right. Mm-hmm. So as a leader, you need to think about: am I seeing everyone on my team? Am I listening and hearing everyone on my team? And am I making everyone on my team feel valued and giving them an opportunity to make a contribution? So that's, from a leadership perspective, it's much more complex than ever. As opposed to, I talk a lot in my classes about the distinctions between management and leadership, and I know, John, you did that as well, right? In terms of, what it means to be a manager, what it means to be a leader, and we need to be both, right? We need to be the one's better or worse than the other. And in the future, we have to be more flexible and more fluid than ever before. And in terms of, and I'm like the last person in the world to be flexible when it comes to change, but it's hard. I represent the early end of the baby boomer spectrum, but we have cross-generational cultures. And we need to be able to adapt to different levels of proficiency with technology, social media, and we can talk about generational things later. But those are just some of the ideas that we're going through in our mind. As leaders, we really need to be open and it's more flexible than ever before.
So what that brings me to is, first of all, I want to let.
I would agree with that to a point. And okay. I think he's right in so many ways with ideas and being open to learning, and good ideas can come from anywhere, and creativity. And I think that's all true. Only the leader is not the only person with the answer or the only people that can solve a problem. That is for sure.
No, I was using leaders as the people at the top, as opposed to the small L leaders, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah, but I do think there is an area that they can't just be whimsical and flimsy on, which are the core values of an organization, which is the mission, vision, values. I
just said flexible. I didn't say whimsical or
okay. Okay, flexible. I don't think you can be flexible about your core values. I really don't. I don't think you can be flexible at all, because if we're focused on our core values and we know these are core things that we believe to be true as an organization, that means we have to hire based on them. It means we have to fire based on them, and we have to promote based on them. Mm-hmm. And so if all of a sudden we decide to change core values or we change paths, we still have, these things are true statements. And
yes,
so
just to clarify, I didn't mean that at all. I meant flexible in terms of leading people. So just in terms of, from a people perspective, we can't just put people in boxes and saying, you're this person, you're that person. A great idea can come from anyone in the organization. We just need to be more open than ever before. But that's a good point. Yeah, you need to stay consistent and core to who you are as an organization.
So Rebecca, I'm going to just ask you, since, as the VP of People at Enigma, where do mission, vision, values fit for a very forward, thinking and trending technology company that Enigma is, doing something new and different in the world, quite frankly?
I think it is the most important thing, because if your squad is changing every 90 days, if your work team is changing every 90 days, if your lead is changing every 90 days, potentially, right? You might stay on a squad for longer, but it could change. We absolutely need these foundational anchors that wrap the company together, that tie us together and make us part of a bigger team if our day-to-day team might be changing. So it is ever more important for a very agile, fluid organization like Enigma to have strong anchors in what is our vision, what is our mission, what is our purpose, what are our values, absolutely, and how are we holding ourselves accountable to them. So we talk about it constantly because it can be uncomfortable for people to have so much change. So that is the thing that is consistent, and we are constantly building on top of.
That's great. That's great to hear that, those are still going to have a place in our future of work, right? So I just want to let the panel know we're still having some technology issues with LinkedIn Live, but a few people have chimed in, and we have people from Switzerland, we have people from South Carolina, across the river in Jersey, so we're really reaching the globe today, and I just want to welcome everyone, and again, stick with us. A link will be made available after we finish this panel today, so you will be able to access it and be able to watch it afterwards. So this this leads me to this, right? We know that automation and AI is changing skills. We've repeated it over and over. We know that that's what's happening already and will continue to happen at a pace that is going to be very challenging. But it's increasing the need for higher cognition, social and emotional wherewithal, and very high level of digital skills. But I want to hone in on that social and emotional wherewithal, because Rebecca, you were basically, that fundamental, these have got to be the anchors, right? And also that line by line review, that's all about that human touch and really raising that emotional ability where humans are needed and will be needed for the foreseen future. We're not going away. John, I'd love you to just, as you're thinking about healthier workplaces, this is just so much integral to a healthier workplace. So can you just sort of give us your thoughts about where you're seeing this go, and how can leaders raise their level emotionally and so forth to be very valuable in this equation?
I think it's simple. I think it comes down to the fact that if human beings are always going to be in the workplace, there's always going to need to be people that have really good leadership skills. Because at the end of the day, we're not going to be led by computers. I mean, they can give us the answers we might need, or they might replace jobs. But as long as we're going to interact human to human, that's something we can't replace. And so I would think the development of each person's leadership skills should be almost at the top of their priority. Because just think of it this way. If you're going to go share your competence with your team or with your squad or whatever it might be, they're going to judge that based on two things. Your ability to know about the industry, the job, the skills, all the things that are a part of that industry. And the other way they're going to judge your competence is based on your leadership skills. Because there's nothing worse than someone that knows the industry really well, but they can't relate and have a conversation with you to understand what's important to you or where we're going. It's painful. So I just think, again, to go back to the beginning, this is like through the automation, through the AI, through the technology, that's happened forever. We've always been changing. It's forever changing. And so, but the human element remains the same. We still need people with really good leadership skills that are looking out for other human beings. And I think that's where I would have everyone here today focus. If they're thinking about where to invest in people, leadership skills has got to be near the top of the list.
Yeah, I would concur with that. The only thing that I would add is, and I'm curious about how this plays in, and Rebecca, I'd love to hear what you have to say here, and then, commenting on my thought, which is, we already know it's a fact. There's multi-generational, people in the workforce right now. That's been talked about enough. We don't need to continue to beat on that. We're all aware of it. However, yesterday I saw a clip of, I think it was no more than an 18-month-old, scrolling on a phone and picking some songs. So that 18-month-old is growing up with a digital device, albeit that device will be very different when they become 20, but still. I didn't grow up that way. I'm of an older generation, and so that's not my learning abilities. And so some of this, automation, AI, and all of this very forward technology, I have to come up to speed as a leader in that in order to lead well, and yes, with good leadership skills. So Rebecca, I'm curious about how you've seen that, and if there's anything you can share with us where you say, yeah, this is how leaders can get ahead on the technology curve to be more agile with everything that's happening?
So what we do at Enigma is in the talent assessment process. So as we're interviewing candidates, the final round is what we call a deep dive. A deep dive interview is something that a core group of us are trained on. It can be like a 2 or 3 hour interview where I do them almost daily. We sit down with a candidate who's passed all the technical skills to pass the bar for the role. And I am asking them to walk through every stage of their life. It's a template, and they're going through high school, college, job 1, job 2, job 3. And I'm really eager to know about their transitions, why they made the choices they made. I'm really eager for them to talk about their proudest moment and accomplishment. And I'm really eager for them to talk about their failures. And the last piece is I'm really eager to understand how they're viewed by their team. They are known to be better than their other team members for this, and they're known to be weaker than their other team members as this. And I then have a view of their journey. Now, everyone is going to have strengths and high moments, and everyone is going to have weaknesses and failures. That's life. So the expectation isn't that we're getting this perfect person. Out of the deep dive, we make an assessment around why would this person be successful at Enigma? So I also have to know our role, our culture, our team. Why would this person fail at Enigma? And we push everyone to come up with something. Everyone has a failure mode. And we look at like what are their drivers and motivators, as we've seen as a pattern through their whole life. The reason we do this is because you can see how people have handled adversity in the past, how they've handled the challenge, how they've learned new skills. There's got to be a time in someone's past. Michelle, if I talk to you, there's got to be a time in your history where you didn't know something, you had to learn it. So I would be really eager to know, how have you faced that? What resources did you use? Who did you lean on? What questions did you have? Did it stress you out? Were you excited about it? Did you come through it? Right. So I'm looking for ways people have exhibited themselves in other experiences and mapping that to the future, right? The best predictor of future behavior is your past behavior.
Yeah.
So the expectation isn't that you're going to find this perfect person who's done everything exactly the way we do here. At Enigma, I say we're building something that's never been built before.
Right.
We're delivering to clients in a way that they've never done work this way. So no matter what experiences anyone has had, everyone at Enigma is doing this job for the first time. Everyone. And today is the biggest day of your job because we are a growing company. So every day is always going to be our biggest day. So I'm really just looking for people who have shown the ability to learn and the eagerness and curiosity to learn, and also as well as the generosity to teach others.
One of the things that Rebecca was referring to, last week I just presented at a conference, the Leadership Forum at Silver Bay up in Lake George, and I facilitated a workshop on creating a failure resume, which is one of the hot topics out there right now. So like everyone's put their resume together, this is my job, this is my achievements, my accomplishments. People had to start with that, but then flip it and say, here's a list of the jobs that I applied for but didn't get. Here's the biggest mistake. Here are the ones I was laid off from or fired from, and what can we learn from that? So just pulling out from people. One of the things that we have to do is create a psychologically safe environment and culture where people feel free, and an environment of trust where people feel free to disclose that. But one of the things I talk about also with leadership is not only leadership storytelling, but leadership story listening. Can you pull the story out of other people? Are you a good listener? Are you empathetic and compassionate? When someone shares their failure with you, do you make them feel stupid about it? Do you say, that's amazing, what can we learn from that, right? So it's like, so I like, Rebecca, your approach to putting a positive spin on failure, because we've all had them. So rather than repeating them, what can we learn from them? I love the Eleanor Roosevelt quote that says, learn from the mistakes of others, life's too short to make them all ourselves, right? So that's, as a leader, if we create that culture where people can share their failures with one another, that's part of creating a learning organization.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Anyone out there is interested in this method, there is a book called WHO, W-H-O.
Yeah.
You can read this. Like, I didn't make up that deep dive framework. That's something that we got from the book WHO. So if anyone's interested, I would recommend reading that book.
Great.
And another company out there, G Smart, who primarily deals with assessments at the CEO and C-suite level, they also have a book. I don't have the name at the tip of my tongue right now, but G Smart is the company, and it really is about these deep dive assessments, Rebecca, in a very in-depth way.
That gentleman is the one who came and trained us.
Ah, got it. Yeah. So there you go, right? So it's quite incredible. That said, we've gotten some comments, and I just want to share those with the panel around, mentoring and networks being key, teaching creativity and innovation. And, just to comment on that, because we were talking about, so what do leaders do to get ready? For instance, in the work that I do, I work very often with CEOs, is I just recently sent a few of my clients to the Aspen Ideas Festival that happened in June. And, that certainly isn't for everyone. However, the reason being, it's a very forward-thinking environment that really propels innovation, creativity, global thought, economic thought in a forum that you might not normally be in and around. So that's something that, again, it's not necessarily you have to go to that festival, but those are the kinds of things that get us as leaders ready for what's coming in the world, globally, locally, for our companies, and how we lead better with very creative thought in mind and not just blinders on what we do for a living. For instance, for myself, I'm planning to go to the CES conference next year in Las Vegas. I don't really have a role there, but I really want to see all the new innovations and technology that I'm sure is going to blow my mind, just so that I can be exposed to it. And again, those to me are things that leaders that we can be doing, and even bringing our more junior people, to John's point, that everyone can be a leader as well, into these kinds of activities to really expose. So we're getting close to the end now. We're at 1:30. And I know we have a few more minutes, but I'd like each of the panelists to have an opportunity to share some closing thoughts. What is one key thing you want to leave the audience with? Our panel was on leadership in organizations and the future of work. The panels prior really got into human experience, diversity and inclusion, and so forth. So we really covered the gamut this morning and today. I've heard squads adapting to change quickly from this panel. Line-by-line meetings, what does success and outcomes look like? Visibility, voice, and value, the 3 V's for leaders to keep in mind. So John, if I can start with you, if you were listening today to talk about a successful outcome, if you were an audience member, what would you want to have heard from this panel? What's the big takeaway?
I'd go a slightly different route. There's lots of things going to happen in the future, and we don't always control them. We control really very little of it. There's an old Latin saying called nunc cepi, and what nunc cepi stands for is today I begin. And the reason why I share that right now is because if you haven't been up to date on what you feel like you're prepared, what I care about is what you're going to do moving forward. And each of us get to make that choice each and every day. Today I begin. And so if you hear things you're not doing, or you're worried about, or we're way behind, I'm not worried about where you've been. I'm worried about where you're going. And so make the best, wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to go do the very best I can today. Nunc cepi. So just remember that today I begin.
Excellent, John. Thank you so much. Todd.
Sure. One of the quotes I always use is that in an ever-changing world, if you're standing still, you're falling behind, because everything's changing. I was talking about the 4 Ns. Anyone, anywhere can get anything, anytime, or work from anywhere, anytime, right? So in that world, what do you need to be doing differently? Rather than being reactive, how can I be proactive? Read as much as possible. Some people say, I read like 1 or 2 books a year. I try to read 1 a week. I don't always hit that target. Some weeks I'll read 2, some weeks I'll read none, but always be reading, watch TED Talks, do events like this. Just be a sponge, take everything in, and own your own development, because no one else will if you don't. So
that's great. Thank you, Todd. Rebecca.
Yeah, I think probably the audience might think we coordinated this, but I promise you we didn't.
We just met.
But I sometimes think we are Western. If you're Western educated, you can get stuck in this like binary stance of like I either am or I am not. Like I'm either right or I'm wrong. And what I'm always trying to tell myself, tell my children, tell the people I work with is think of it more as like a continuum where you just want to be better today than we were yesterday. Are we taking one small step? What's one thing we can do? Sometimes when I hear people talk, I hear experts talk, or I read a book, it feels like the mountain is so tall, and like, how am I ever going to climb it? It can feel intimidating. You might not have the experiences, but everyone starts from the same place. And if you could just do one small step and make yourself do something better today than you did yesterday, I think that's just a great way to stay motivated.
I love that our panelists were aligned and almost had similar takeaways for our audience today. How exciting is that? So I was delighted to moderate today. Thank you for allowing me to do that. And certainly even more so delighted that I was moderating the last panel of this fabulous summit. The recordings